Once again, welcome everybody uh, to our first Global English seminar in quite a while. Today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Kaisa Pietikäinen with us, and she's going to tell us something about online intercultural negotiations to integrate BELF approaches in business English communication. I think this is a really interesting topic, which is not there is some research about it, but it's always nice to hear more about its latest development. So whenever you'd like to begin, the floor is yours, Dr. Pietikäinen. Thank you again so much for your availability.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the invitation to speak here at the seminar series. I'm a fan of ELF and GE and a researcher in that area as well. So a little bit about myself. So I'm associate professor at the Norwegian School of Economics, and here I teach English for business for our economics students. I'm also a researcher within English as a lingua franca, or I call it ELF. I don't call it ELF. I go with the NOM term. And lately I've been involved in a pedagogic research project that deals with integrating English as a business lingua franca pragmatics into business English teaching. And together with my colleagues, we've developed a case activity on online intercultural negotiations, which I hope will be helpful for other teachers who are grappling with the issue of, okay, so how should we actually integrate global Englishes or ELF approaches into teaching business English? And I will show you a little bit about the project. So the project is called The Best of Both Worlds, an online intercultural collaboration between NHH and VU Vienna, NHH being the Norwegian School of Economics, my institution, and VU Vienna is the Vienna University of Economics and Business in Austria. And together with my colleague Mia Kamori Glutz, we've developed a pedagogical activity, a puzzle piece that brings our students together, business English students together, to practice the use of ELF pragmatic strategies in a semi-authentic business case. And this initiative, which we started in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, when we realized that, well, the only thing that we really liked about using Zoom for our teaching was that it catered for intercultural collaboration. This initiative was started then, and it was actually awarded with VU's Innovative Teaching Award in 2023. And we've been working on this project ever since. And I'm not going to be talking about an action research project that we've completed on this, but we've also collected new data from the negotiations themselves, and we're working on a new aspect in this project. So I will show you my table of contents first. So first I will go into some theoretical background into business English, English as a business lingua franca, and how they relate to business English teaching. Then I'll give a brief overview of BELF pragmatics, and then I'll talk you through our project, how it came about, how it was developed based on feedback from our students. And then I'll conclude and give our best practice recommendations for teachers who are maybe pondering about how could I do something like this in my own classroom. So just a minute, I'll adjust that screen. So as you may know, business English has traditionally relied on the English for specific purposes paradigm. So it has had a very heavy focus on business terminology, for example, vocabulary related to trade and finance, genre conventions, for example, business presentations, pitches, report writing, etc., and discursive practices within these contexts. And primarily, the focus has been to equip students with communication skills that they can use in Anglophone context, so when doing business with the Brits or Americans. So in this way, the starting point has been very similar to if we compare it with English language teaching and when we look at the starting point for GELF, for GELT. So the focus has been on the native speaker normativity, but in recent years, however, we have seen that researchers noted the importance of English as an international language for international business, and especially the position of English as a corporate language in multinational corporations. So what are we training our students for? That's the main question. What kind of a world are they going to be operating in where they need English? And it might actually be the case that our students may never leave their home countries, but they might find themselves working for corporations where English is an official language. Or, of course, then there are opportunities that they might use English in international business settings where Anglophone cultures are perhaps not as relevant as they previously were thought to be. And these are, in fact, aspects that business English should also cater for. I'm pretty, I assume that's you as a group or as a community of teachers engaged with GELT are familiar with the concept of English as a lingua franca, but maybe not as familiar with English as a business lingua franca. So I'm using my colleague Mia's definition of BELF as the use of English as the medium of communication among speakers of different first languages in an emergent, variable, and hybrid manner that is appropriate to the demands and multilingual resources of the specific business context. So as a communicative practice, BELF is always context dependent. So, for example, trade may have very different communicative practices from, say, marketing or the law department, but also each community or practice where BELF speakers operate, be it a firm or even a team, each of these communities come with their own linguistic practices. So that means that BELF is emergent in these settings, and the linguistic practices within these communities are also negotiated anew in every situation. But one thing that seems to be the case is that there is a clear business orientation to this kind of communication as a differentiation from ELF. So there's a focus on getting tasks done. And then there's another focus that is very important and highlighted in BELF communication, which is that speakers pay attention to building rapport. So maintaining positive business relationships as they go on with the business. So we can see that in teaching English for business, there seems to be a paradigm shift now where BELF approaches should be incorporated into teaching. So there have been actually various recommendations, for example, including multicultural BELF and business competence in our teaching, conducting needs analysis of the situations that our students will use English for, and also collaborating with professionals in order to do this. Shifting away from native speaker normativity, highlighting accommodation, rapport, and intertextuality. And these are all fantastic suggestions, but how do we do this in the classroom? How do we practically solve this situation or this issue? And when it comes to teaching BELF pragmatics, BELF researchers Kankaanranta and Louhiala-Salminen proposed that we should actually use simulations, problem-based learning, and case-based teaching. So we should provide our students with actual interactive situations and kind of really working with the language and with these tasks. Cora and Berlik also recommend role-play activities where the students practice situations where they would normally work in English, such as meetings or negotiations. And they also suggest that since much of today's global business is taking place online in settings like this, that we should be using video conferencing for this. And this all sounds very good. But the issue with these suggestions is that these pedagogic activities haven't been tested that much so far. So we don't actually know to what extent our students can learn from these activities and how we as teachers should design such activities that target the complexities of BELF. And at this point of my talk, I would actually like to zoom back a little bit to the Global Englishes for Language Teaching model. And let's think about how these aspects in BELF-aware business English teaching relate to the recommendations from the GELT model. So the GELT model recommends increasing exposure to World Englishes and ELF, emphasizing respect for multilingualism, raising awareness of Global Englishes and ELF strategies, emphasizing respect for cultural diversity, and changing hiring practices in higher education in order to involve more non-native speaking teachers from outer circle and expanding circle teachers. And while, of course, we can't really change these hiring practices in a heartbeat, but what we can do as teachers is to include all of these other aspects in our teaching. And our project specifically focuses on the aspect of raising awareness and teaching ELF pragmatic strategies, and specifically in business contexts, to our students. Now I'll give you a short introduction into BELF pragmatics. What is the content that we are basically teaching? What are the aspects that we're focusing on? So first of all, in BELF, as in ELF, there seems to be a heightened focus on achieving shared understanding. So speakers would oftentimes try to use such syntax and vocabulary that they expect the counterpart to understand. They use explaining to make sure that mutual understanding is achieved. They use meta discourse to guide the interaction and making clear that, okay, previously we've been talking about this aspect, now we're moving on to that aspect on the agenda, for example. They repeat and paraphrase essential information so that everyone is on the same page. And they draw on their shared multilingual resources. So these are aspects that we've identified in BELF research that speakers do. Secondly, there seems to be a heightened focus on collaboration in BELF contexts. And this we can see in active listening, in back channeling that signals comprehension or lack thereof. And also speakers use a lot of multimodal aspects, visual aids, written confirmations that also are focused on the achieving of the collaboration and mutual understanding. Thirdly, there's a focus on rapport. So this we can see, for example, in the aspect that disagreement is commonly attached to the task rather than to a person. And there is a heightened focus on the desired outcome, the business outcome. And that we can also see in the fact that speakers would oftentimes try to make sure that a long-term good business relationship is maintained. So it's not just about reaching the deal right now, but also making sure that this business relationship continues into the future. So for example, in disagreeing, there is oftentimes a flurry of then positive feedback afterwards that we can see that kind of counters the possible face threat of a disagreement. And this is something that is quite common to BELF communication. So how can we develop a teaching activity that practices the use of these strategies? Well, now we coming to the aspect of our project. Mia and I have been working on this project that has the aim of developing a research-informed teaching activity for practicing the use of BELF pragmatic strategies between our two student groups, so students from Norway and students from Austria. And for this project, we had two research questions. Firstly, how can we use the affordances of online teaching to develop a viable and meaningful pedagogical activity for our students to practice pragmatic strategies as a key feature of effective BELF communication? And here, yes, we are relying on the affordances of online teaching that I'm sure that everyone in this room learned very, very quickly when they had to start online teaching in the pandemic. So how can we carry this learnable with us and achieve something, an activity that is viable, so that we don't have to spend an eternity planning it. We can easily do it several times in our courses. We don't have to design it anew every time, and something that won't take a whole restructuring of our syllabus to make. And at the same time, we want this activity to be meaningful for our students. We want our students to enjoy doing it. And we want to see that there is a clear learning outcome from this activity. And on the basis of this project, then, what kinds of recommendations can we identify to make this activity scalable for other contexts, other courses, so that everyone else can benefit from this project? And this project that I'm referring to now is an action research project that ran over 3 phases, starting in the spring semester of 2022. And we collected student feedback already right after the negotiation activity. We had a Mentimeter where they gave their initial insights. Then we had a questionnaire after the activity, and then at the end of the courses, we collected course reflections on this activity. And I'll show you a little outline of what the project really looks like. So, as I said, the project ran in 3 different phases. First, we started with the planning. And the first hurdle, and I would say actually the biggest hurdle, was the schedule coordination. When you're doing international collaboration, you quickly find out that, things are taught in a very different way, or the structure of our courses is very different, or even our semesters don't match. So we found out that we only had about 2 to 3 weeks of teaching at the same time in our respective institutions. So this was the hurdle number 1, to find a slot that would suit both courses. And of course, we wanted to also make sure that we had some preparation time for the students. So it ended up being so that the activity took place at the very end of my course and at the beginning of Mia's course, where she had maybe 2 or 3 weeks before our session. So, and this is something that I would say really is the biggest hurdle. Then we engaged with the design of the activity, and I will come to that later. And then when it came to the implementation phase, we had lectures or reading on intercultural negotiations and BELF. I will also show you a little bit later what we included in our preparation. And then we had this joint session, and the joint session only lasted for 90 minutes. And at the beginning of it, we had a short socialization session in breakout rooms where the students got to know each other a little bit before they then were brought back into the main room. Then we sent them back into the breakout rooms to have this negotiation activity. And then after the negotiation, which lasted for about 35 to 40 minutes, we brought them back to the main room where we had this peer feedback session on Mentimeter. And so we collected student feedback, peer feedback, and the students' reflections. and our old field notes, and then we did content analysis of all of these, and then figured out, okay, so based on the feedback, what should we change for next time around, and how does it work? Do our students learn what they're supposed to learn from this activity? And this happened 3 times. Right, I'll give you a little bit information about our contexts now. Both schools are business schools. VU is much larger than my institution in Norway. And our courses were also quite different, but this does not need to be a hurdle for organizing activities like these. Mia's course was a English for Business Communication 3 course, so the students had already taken 1 or 2 courses of English business communication before. It was a compulsory course, and the students were usually later in their bachelor studies. Whereas my students could be the first time they do or take an English course at our school, and they are usually first or second year students taking a bachelor in business administration. And then there were further differences, which were that Mia's student groups were 25 students max, and that was usually the student number that she had, whereas my student group could be anywhere between 12 and 120 students, so you never knew what kinds of student numbers you would get. So that's also one of the hurdles that played into the planning of the activity. What I would say about the intended learning outcomes, Mia's intended learning outcomes were a little bit more generic, general competence, business English competence at C1 level, whereas mine had a bit more focus on strategies for business interaction, including in intercultural context. We had aspects of meeting interactions already included in our classes. So I would say that we had different kinds of ways to deal with this, and my students, of course, since they had been at the course longer, they had prepared perhaps better. But on the other hand, my students were younger than me as students. So I would say English proficiency-wise, they were about the same, at the same level. Now, when it comes to the case then, we started with planning the case from the perspective of international mergers and acquisitions that we found was a topic that both our courses included. And interestingly, actually, international mergers are a topic where language can play a significant role. So language is topicalized in international mergers, and therefore we thought that this would be a nice addition into our negotiation. So the students would actually have to negotiate on what is going to be the corporate language in a joint venture. So the case was about a joint venture between 2 energy companies. And first we used pseudonyms, but then later on we decided to use the actual names of the companies. So we chose Equinor and OMV, that are local energy companies in our contexts. And basically this was very easy for us to choose as a context because these are major players in both countries. But I would say that in general, choosing a setting that caters for natural collaboration between the countries would make sense. So the case was actually about negotiating the final stages of a joint venture, and they did this in small teams of 2 to 3 students from each country in each Zoom breakout room. And if you want to go into the case and see what it's like, you can use that QR code to check it out. So you can grab your phone and see if you can find it there. And please let me know if it doesn't open and I'll try and fix it. So as I said earlier, the joint activity only took 2 hours or 2 teaching hours, 90 minutes, and that made it a lot easier to embed it in our course structure. And as I also mentioned earlier, we had this 10-minute socialization that was embedded in the session in order to specifically focus on building rapport before the students started the negotiation. And then when it comes to the aspect of intertextuality in BELF as recommended by Bhatti and Bremner, we included a written document, meeting minutes, that then the student group needed to produce afterwards. So that also forced them to check shared understanding and make sure that they're on the same page with what has been agreed on in this negotiation. Let's see. When it comes to then the teaching materials, these are copies of my slides from spring semester 2023. So as I mentioned before, the activity took place at the end of my course, so I had, of course, a lot more time to incorporate relevant teaching content, but I didn't actually have to change very much because this content was already there. I was already teaching these aspects just with imaginary cross-cultural contexts. So we had negotiations earlier, so this was just that we were going to do a real intercultural negotiation. So my course materials consisted of some basics on cross-cultural management, meeting interaction essentials, some phraseology when it comes to expressing polite disagreement, hedging strategies, but also specific strategies from ELF and BELF communication, how to preempt miscommunication, what kinds of aspects are expected from business interactions where BELF is used. Then when it came to Mia's course, she actually, as I mentioned, she did this at the beginning of her course, so she didn't have that much time to have or go that much into detail in her lectures. So the students read a few articles, relevant articles, and they watched the video and they made a collaborative phrase bank for meeting interactions. And then they created a social media jigsaw on Instagram about Coren Berlich's article, actually. So they read that article on BELF communication. And then, of course, each group did have preparation time for the actual negotiation. So they had some time in their groups to focus on their negotiation strategy. Now, let me see where I'm at. Yeah, this is an actual screenshot from one of the negotiations, but I've anonymized it. So the session went so that first, of course, we had the preparation, that lectures. My topics were basics of business meetings, mergers and acquisitions, management and cultural diversity, which included cultural dimensions, pragmatic strategies, and BELF. So these are student active lectures where students do a lot of work in small groups already. And then they joined in this joint session for 90 minutes. And we had that socialization, negotiation, and the debriefing or the reflection right afterwards. And then after this meeting, we collected peer feedback. It was since my students, I couldn't force them to do that anymore at the end of their course. Only Mia students were actually graded on how they gave peer feedback to my students. But my students also then voluntarily gave peer feedback to me as students. And then they wrote their reflections on this activity. What do we learn? What do we see in how they felt about this assignment and what we could take home from this activity? So in phase 1, We were thrilled to get this rating of how likely would you recommend this session to other students, rated 4.94 stars out of 5. So this is really something that the first time around they were thrilled. They loved it. They mentioned that it was the highlight of the whole course. Learning and getting to know the other students was thrilling and presented one of the few good parts of online teaching. I'm convinced that this sort of experience would enrich the everyday life of every student. So I was quite surprised to hear actually that not very many of our students have the opportunity to have these intercultural encounters. I mean, some of course go on, they have internships or they go and have exchange years abroad, but those that can't afford it or can't go for numerous reasons, they don't necessarily encounter any possibilities of practicing intercultural communication, English as a lingua franca, during the whole progression of their studies. So this is something that they truly valued. What we did after the first round was that we integrated the communication goals in the intended learning outcomes of the course, and this was particularly a change that Mia did for her intended learning outcomes. We also managed to embed the activity in the course as a firm component, repeating component, which also allowed us to schedule more preparation for the students. That was actually one of the 2 negative comments that we received from the student feedback was that they wanted to prepare better, so they needed more preparation time. The second one was that the students experienced that the negotiation topics weren't hard enough. And for our students, this means that they want to negotiate on numbers. They experience that as being harder. So therefore, we included then one point in the agenda that was more numbers-based than what we had before. In the second phase, then we did this activity again. We scored again quite high, score 4.75 out of 5. And here we can see that again, we get this positive feedback. It was a great experience. Negotiating is a part of life, and I truly thought that this exercise was helpful. But then we started getting also some comments that were specific about this. We did ask a question, what did you learn from this activity? But the students answered oftentimes were a little bit broad. So oftentimes they referred to intercultural communication using English in professional settings and negotiation tactics. Also, chairing a negotiation was something that they mentioned that they learned. And in order, again, they said that they wanted to do more preparation. So that's when we decided to use the real companies instead, so that they can do background research on the companies. We haven't asked permission from these companies. I don't know how they feel about us using them in our cases, but we thought that this is a nice addition, so the students can have actually something tangible that they can refer to. And then we also allowed more time for feedback, which was one of the aspects that the students mentioned. In the final third phase, we received a little bit lower grading, 4.53 out of 5. However, all the ratings were 4 or 5 stars, so it's not a bad rating. But here we started seeing that the comments were a little bit more scattered. And the negative comments, there were some criticisms on using oil companies as case companies. And especially in our organizations, there has been a lot more focus on sustainability in recent years. So even though sustainability was an aspect in our case, some of the students felt uncomfortable about working for an oil company. And then there was a comment about my students. Somehow, exceptionally that year, my student group appeared younger. So that was one complaint from the VU side. So what we started then gathering is that these comments are more not about does the pedagogic activity work and do the students learn, because they did say we learned about building rapport. They like the approach, learning by doing. So it's more about than these details about, okay, who is the other party and what is the case really, what are the companies, etc. So we concluded that this is a functioning activity and we can continue with working this case. So our take-home message then is that through this kind of systematic action research, we were able to integrate our students' feedback and our own reflections to create a functioning activity that does seem to offer transformative learning experiences of using BELF in a quasi-realistic scenario. And now in one of the recent rounds that we did this case, we also gained access to the students' negotiations. So they gave us permission to record these breakout rooms. So now we also have videos that we will analyze as to what strategies do they actually use in their negotiations. And the course is, the component is now a regular activity in our courses. We've done it with 3 other universities, so we have been applying it to other contexts as well, other national contexts. And we've created a new case on a chocolate brand that we've also used, and we alternate that with the energy company case. And we've also, based on this, we are developing an engage.eu course. So a lot has kind of sprung from this project, and it does seem like the case now works. And then to answer the second research question, what kinds of recommendations can we identify? Well, so what would we say to teachers who are planning an activity like this? How should you start? How should you go about? The first point is to identify the added value of using online negotiations for your particular course. So this reasoning should really be integrated in the learning outcomes. For example, in our course, especially in my course on the outset, was for the students to learn negotiating in English in international business contexts. So that is a very good starting point for these kinds of activities. And you should find a good partner here. I've been extremely lucky. I couldn't be happier to work with Mia. She's an excellent colleague. So you should also find somebody who's flexible, creative, trustworthy, does what they promise to do, and can work out these differences when it comes to the arrangement of the activity, and especially the timing and the academic cultures, etc. Identify potential overlaps where collaboration makes sense. So the case topic should be relevant to both courses topics, but it doesn't really matter if you're not teaching the same course. So for example, we've done this or a similar case with marketing students from Latvia, where the Latvian students were then we were discussing a marketing campaign for a product. And so you can tweak the case so that it suits each of the courses. And of course, for us, having the topic of international mergers already ingrained in our courses, that created a very nice starting point, and it was actually quite easy to then start figuring this kind of a case out. And then start working through the logistics well ahead, at least one semester ahead of time. because, well, we are on the same time zone, so we didn't have that aspect. But that's one of the reasons why we don't do negotiation cases with Chinese or Japanese or American students, is that one of our student groups is sleeping. And in our academic culture, we can't expect our students to work after 5 o'clock in the evening. That's also one aspect that comes down to the intercultural aspect of this activity. So how do your semester schedules and the academic cultures, how can you take those into consideration? Then prepare teaching materials on BELF pragmatics, and then against this background, generate rubrics that guide your students' performance in the negotiation. I didn't speak very much about this at this time, but if you're interested in this aspect, in the case, if you still have the QR code, in the case on the last page, we have the rubric that we then used for the students to give peer evaluations to each other. And this was based on our learning outcomes. Allow plenty of preparation time and keep the joint session as focused as possible. This makes it easier for you to embed the course into your course structure. To embed the activity into the course structure. And then plan enough time for socialization. Because rapport building is so important in BELF, we should really try to ingrain that in this activity. So include a socialization session if in any way possible. And actually, our students were saying that they would have wanted to meet the students again and then maybe exchange contact details. So if you have the chance, do the socialization before and after the activity as well. Then, in order to, in essence, force the students to negotiate understanding and link in the different kinds of business genres together, the negotiation and the written documentation, ask them to create some sort of a written document, for example, the meeting minutes or a report of the meeting. And then include some sort of an assessed performance component to motivate the students to participate. So at the start, when we started, Zoom didn't allow recording of the breakout rooms. It wasn't possible. So we couldn't assess the negotiations themselves. So for my course, what I decided to do is to make it an obligatory component in the course, whereas Mia was then grading the peer feedback that her students were giving my students. So we had different assessed learning components, but still that's something to motivate the students to participate and also to gain a better overview of how much they learn and how well they did. And then, of course, lastly, collect student feedback. It will help you in further development of the activity. Here are my references, and thank you so much. I hope this has been helpful to at least some of you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Pietikäinen. I think it was a really interesting focus, and especially we recommend the pragmatic suggestions that you provided at the end. I think those are really going to be useful to the people in attendance and to the people who will be able to check this presentation in the future. I see we have a few questions in the chat, so we're going to go through those first. But if anybody else has any questions, raise your hand, or if you don't want your voice to be recorded, you can just type in the chat. The chat is not being recorded, all right? So nobody will know that you have asked a question. But the first question is actually a request. It would be nice to provide the list of the related negotiation skills book once again, please.
We are going to record this and publish this on YouTube, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want, should I show them now or
If
or
you
just share
if you
them?
can find it, yeah, it's yeah. Just
Oh,
maybe you can reiterate some of the points you had made there.
was it this?
Was it this
Or
one?
The books, the list of the book of your research, I think one on page before, I guess.
let's see. You mean these?
In the diagram, not really. That's why I'm trying to
Or-
catch you on that one. The list of the textbook. I saw pattern something on the name of the book.
do you mean here?
One more.
No, this is the first.
Oh no, I think you have the textbook reference.
Okay, I'll go to the references and you can
Yeah.
from there.
Thank you. Um, it's
Yeah,
one
with
page, right?
Bucky and Bremner article.
Right. Okay. That's a quick one. Thank you. Good.
We also have another question from the chat. Very interesting, thank you. Is it likely that this project works with highly motivated students only?
Sorry, highly
Motivated, highly motivated
motivated.
students.
Well, that was one of the fears that we had before we'd done this. We were afraid that, what if our students just sit back and they don't do anything? What then? But I think there's also an aspect of they know that they're going to negotiate with a group from another business university, and at least our students seem to also think that they're representing their institution. So if they come unprepared, they would have given a really bad impression of themselves and the school. So that was actually a fear that was completely unfounded. So I don't think that you need to have very specifically very highly motivated students. I mean, we have students who are more motivated than others, but then we also have students that are not as motivated. But when you put them in small groups, everyone has a role that they have to take on. They have specific goals for the task. It does seem that, well, of course, there are some students who will speak a little bit less than others, but they usually have agreed at least, okay, so I'm the CFO, so I will be talking about the cash investment, and I'm the CEO, so then um, I will chair the session or something. So it doesn't seem like it requires any kind of special motivation from the students.
Thank you, Dr. Pietikäinen. There's another question just right now in the chat. Thank you for your very interesting talk. Sounds like a great project. I was curious whether you and your colleague also received or sought out training on facilitating online meetings. If so, any recommendations for during the links?
Did we receive anything? To be honest, I can't remember. I think the COVID was our best trainer in online teaching. And of course, we tested as far as we could do. We could go. We did test how it would work out and who does what and so on. But I really can't point you to any resources either, because I've blissfully forgotten about them.
I see. Thank
Sorry.
you. Thank you. No, no worries. Thank you, Dr. Pietikäinen. Um, while we're waiting to see if anybody else has any questions, I do have a question which is related to the intercultural element of this. I really appreciated that when you mentioned the academic culture of a specific institution, because I feel that this is a problem in general, but especially perhaps for business, when culture is discussed, when intercultural communication is discussed, it actually tends to be cross-cultural communication in the sense that culture is understood as at the national level, in the sense like, oh, it's Norwegian students and Austrian students. So I wanted to ask, how was this tackled in this particular project? And yeah, I don't know if my question makes sense.
I think it does actually make a lot of sense, and you're absolutely right. In cross-cultural management studies, for example, there's a very much still an essentialist focus on culture, and very much it's about national cultures, which does not in any way reflect the reality of the business world in today's community. So even in our student groups, we have, even though the majority of them, the majority of my student groups are Norwegian first language speakers. The majority of MIA students were German first language speakers, Austrian students, but very many of them actually have bilingual or multicultural backgrounds. So it's not so clear cut that these are the cultural groups. But of course, there's it does force them to talk about cultural differences. For example, there we have included some aspects in the case where they need to talk about the working cultures in the specific companies. And with this, we are trying to also highlight that the cross-cultural differences may not be related to national cultures, but they might actually be related to company cultures, for example. So that's an aspect that they have to deal with, and I have tried to emphasize this in my own teaching, that we also discuss cross-cultural and intercultural communication from the perspectives of well, not from the essentialist perspective, but post modern perspectives. But of course, this is what I find in contrast to teaching English majors at the university and then versus teaching business students. Our teaching is very pragmatic from the outset. They want tools that they can use in their working life. So we don't really engage that much with theory at the bachelor level. Master's courses are different, of course.
No, absolutely understandable, and thank you for the answer. It's quite interesting that effort was put into trying to address this, because even with awareness of, okay, yeah, perhaps cross-cultural approaches are not necessarily the best ones, it's not easy to think of, okay, so if that's not good enough, what can we do? But for example, focusing on the specific company culture, that could be a possibility. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your answer. And all right, anybody has any further questions? If you end up like me very often that have, oh, I should have asked that particular question, perhaps you can get in touch after the seminar and I can get your questions available to, or you can just contact Dr. Pietikäinen directly if it's possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, just get in touch, and I'd be happy to get feedback, or if you'd like to use the case as a basis for developing your own case, get in touch with either me or Mia. That's completely fine.
Thank you so much for your availability, Dr. Pietikäinen, and thank you again for contributing this seminar to Elinet. We will stop the recording now. Thank you again so much to everybody who attended. I really appreciate you being here today.